All right. Here comes another fine Bible study. Let's see if we can get this done. People can join in YouTube live chat. I'm not going to waste a lot of time. I'm not going to wait for anyone. This should be replayable later. And the goal is to get um, more of these Bible studies in. They will be live. So if you happen to see me live, you can join. I'm not sure why I'm wearing headphones. I don't need them for anything. I was just testing sound, I guess. And yeah, so the point is to kind of jump on and do this more often, and then there will be a record on the channel. I'm using YouTube's own live service, so let's see if it works well. We're doing a study of Timothy. We're continuing our study of First Timothy. This will be chapter 3. Now, you guys won't see the text that I'm reading, but feel free to follow along in whatever your preferred Bible is. I'm going to look up the Berean Study Bible. That's what I was using in the other ones, and it was pretty good. Okay. 1 Timothy 3. This is what it says. This is a trustworthy saying. If anyone aspires to be an overseer, he desires a noble task. That's how it starts. So now it's going to start talking about overseers in the church. An overseer then must be above reproach, the husband of but one wife, temperate, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not dependent on wine, not violent, but gentle, peaceable, and free of the love of money. I find that very interesting. So, just for comparison's sake, let's look at what something like the NET Bible, how that they translate it. Because we've got the word overseer, and I noticed that it says stuff like hospitable, but the word overseer is the key word here. And I think a lot of different translations are going to translate that differently. NET also says overseer. What does the good old King James say? A bishop. Now, you see, that's something about the King James Version, is that the King James Version was created really on the heels of the Protestant Reformation. And so they were just inheriting really this title of bishop, which was not original. You can go to the interlinear and see that the word in Greek is, well, I'm not going to be able to read this properly because it's Greek, but episcopes. It means an inspector, a superintendent. So overseer is good for that. Bishop has a very Catholic flavor to it because the Catholic Church is what was dominating the culture. All right. So the overseer, and I like that. I like that, just the idea that this is an overseer who's trying to, they're trying to just supervise a big crowd of people, because that's what, when you think of a church, you think of a building, maybe even a cathedral or a, traditional Catholic sort of big church. And then you think of bishops ruling over them like it's their territory. But this is talking about a assembly, which is the biblical concept, not the church. So you'd have a city, and all the Christians in that city would be part of that assembly. And then you would have an overseer because you need to have things be organized and, just pick someone who's reputable and good in that community who fits this description, and they can oversee the proceedings when the assembly gets together to discuss things. I don't think there was really supposed to be any of the modern idea or the Catholic idea. It was sort of something that's never really been tried originally. Nobody's really followed this advice, the format of the original church, at least not consciously and deliberately as a system. So, if you want to be an overseer, it's a noble task. You have to be above reproach. So that means you don't have a bad reputation, you don't already have enemies, you know, you're somebody that a lot of people could easily listen to because you haven't proven yourself to be untrustworthy. The husband of but one wife is interesting just insofar as the early church would have not known that. They would not have known that having multiple wives was disqualifying or made you seem less respectable. Now, the implication could be here that you have to have at least one wife. And so then a single man was not a good candidate for an overseer. But I think this is more likely just the nature of every man was presumed to be able to get a wife pretty easily, um, and multiple wives, without much difficulty. The church was not comprised of rich people. It was, well, I mean, there were rich people in it, but, um, basically every generation until ours had an easy time getting a wife. And so that wouldn't have been a big task. It's really just the last 40 years where marriage has fallen apart and it's become strangely difficult to have a wife. Let me check my settings here on YouTube if I can. No, it's got no settings. All right. I feel like my microphone is quiet here, but somebody in chat can let me know. We do have the ability to chat if you're watching on YouTube. Um, I will be reading your chats. If anyone wants to chime in here, we're going to run through this chapter. If not, I'll just continue on, but we'll see how okay, I hear it sounds good. Thank you for the comment, because I have a sound bar at the bottom here that is measuring the sound volume, and it looks like it's all the way at the bottom, and it's not giving me any bars really, but as long as you guys can hear me, that's what matters. I know the microphone is good. Um, so now we're talking about the overseers and how this has really never been a systematic a way of approaching the assembly. As soon as the Catholic Church took over, the idea of churches and buildings and bishops became the norm. And then even the Protestants, when they broke off from it, you had the Anglicans, the Lutherans, they still wanted to have bishops. They still wanted to trace their whole lineage back to the original church fathers. It was really the Anabaptists, the Mennonites and the Amish, who really, and I guess the Quakers to some extent, that broke away and wanted to have something more radically biblical. But even they just didn't know how to talk about this stuff. So they still use the term bishop. So you have Mennonites with bishops. And yes, it is different in the system, but the language is still the same. And I think the language matters. That's something you'll notice when I'm doing my Bible studies. overseer is such a simple term, you know? It doesn't have any grandeur to it. Being above reproach, the husband of one wife. Uh, let's see what the note here says in the study Bible. Oh, apparently, in the footnotes, some people think it should be translated as they should be faithful to their wife, so that implication wise, it's not about polygamy as much as it is about not having side women if you're married. That's interesting. Either way, temperate, self controlled, and respectable all sort of go together. You know, you're just not somebody who's going to rile up crowds with political intrigue, drama. You're you kind of it fits in with this idea of the assembly. You have to understand the assembly if you want to understand what an overseer's job is. And nobody talks about the assembly, the congregation. Yes, people congregate in church, but once you've got the pews and you've got the building and you've got the rituals and you've got the whole structure to it, um, it's not the same. When you have a big assembly, you need crowd control. And there, especially originally, there would have been no proper structure. I mean, they could have loosely imitated the synagogue, they could have loosely imitated pagan style of gatherings because they would have their own assemblies for just the city people. Um, Regardless of religion, they would just have assemblies. So there would have been, you know, the structure in culture, I guess. But really, this Christian thing had to be especially temperate and self controlled and respectable because they were under examination from the Jewish and Greek and Roman authorities. So if they were crazy, loud, we saw in the book of Acts, I believe, that Paul goes into a city and they're having a big meeting. And what happens? As they're talking about it, they start to get themselves riled up. And the next thing you know, they're chanting and rioting and acting crazy. And then the guards have to come in, or rather, somebody warns them that, you know, they're going to be in danger of being charged with lawlessness or I forget what the term is, but basically they were going to be too chaotic and the law was going to have to step in and enforce something because these are passionate people. And you don't want that for the Christian assembly. So you have to have self-control and be temperate yourself if you want to set an example and control other people. Being hospitable is interesting because being hospitable kind of means you're uh, willing to indulge people. You're gracious towards them, and uh, that's different than a very stern, cold, sort of standoffish. You know, I stand up here, you stand there. You want to invite people in, right? That the whole idea is to teach people about Jesus. The whole idea is to get people to see God's goodness. So I think that's part of it. Um, Able to teach obviously makes sense. That's part of what the overseer is going to do. Even if the overseer isn't an apostle or somebody who has, you know, direct scholarly experience, you can teach people even if you don't have big qualifications. When it says able to teach, that's not the same as saying you need to have a theology degree or you have to have a proper education. Jesus didn't have that any, you know, in the Greek side of things, he didn't have some big academy education. He learned in synagogues and he learned from teachers and Pharisees and whatever. He read the scriptures and heard the teachings. But there's way too much emphasis put on scholarly study today. Not being dependent on wine. That's an interesting translation. I want to see what the other translations say. New International says not given to drunkenness. English Standard says not a drunkard. King James says not given to wine. Some say not overindulging, not addicted, not an excessive drinker, must not be heavy drinkers. So there's a lot of different ways that that's translated. Here it just says not dependent on wine. And when you think of the King James not given to wine, it's about a sort of lapse of judgment and tendency to go back to it frequently, but it doesn't necessarily mean, yeah, it kind of does mean the same thing as being a drunkard, but I think it's a more gentle thing, perhaps. If you look at the different ways it's translated, very interesting that that would be a concern back then already. Um, you might think that just being self-controlled is good enough. You say you should be self-controlling, and then it would go without saying that you're not a drunk. But some people needed to be spelled out a little bit more clearly. Being the husband of one wife, or being faithful to your wife. Those things need to be spelled out. We're at a time in the early church where nobody knows what the rules are because the law, the Moses law, is no longer in effect. But the Greeks are in danger of thinking that means anything goes. And we see that in the book of Acts and elsewhere in the epistles where they start to go crazy. And so there needs to be a lot of restraint, but not a lot of legalism. And so you need the Holy Spirit to be guiding things, but people are, especially new Christians, who don't know what the rules are, they would need to be told these things explicitly. Not violent. I mean, that seems to me that it goes without saying, but you think of the Catholic priests and the Roman authorities who called themselves Christians, but they were like condemning people and very violent, really. I mean, even if they weren't personally carrying out the violence, they were violent in their intentions and handing people over to be executed and burned at the stake and all the things that ended up happening in the Holy Roman Empire and Europe and stuff. Gentle, peaceable, and free of the love of money. I mean, you find a guy who fits all these descriptions, and yeah, that's somebody you wouldn't mind overseeing a procession with a lot of Christians. An overseer must, this is verse 4 of 1 Timothy 3. I know you guys can't see the text on the screen, so if you use Bible Hub, you can follow along there and choose whichever translation you want. I'm using the Berean Standard Bible right now, and I think it's a pretty good translation. It says, an overseer must manage his own household well and keep his children under control with complete dignity. For if someone does not know how to manage his own household, how can he care for the church of God? He must not be a recent convert, or he may become conceited and fall under the same condemnation as the devil. That's an interesting way of translating that. I'm wondering what the other translations are for that verse. He must not be a recent convert, says the English Standard Version, or he may become puffed up with conceit and fall into the condemnation of the devil. I think most translations say condemnation incurred by the devil, or let's go to the NET. They're usually pretty precise. He must not be a recent convert, or he may become arrogant and fall into the punishment that the devil will exact. So the idea is that the devil will do something with that condemnation. Um, the Berean Standard Bible. What was I just barely reading? Because now I see it says, oh, same condemnation of the devil. Furthermore, he must have a good reputation with outsiders so that he will not fall into disgrace and into the snare of the devil. So if you have a bad reputation with outsiders and you become disgraced, that is where the devil will ensnare you and pounce on you, I suppose. And your guilt and your shame and your inability to recover in the eyes of other people would make you, and I think guilt and shame is a big part of what makes Christians ineffective and fall into the snare of the devil. And you need to repent, much more, and try to recover your sense of not innocence per se, because maybe that's too strong of a word, but your grace and your state of um, flexibility, so you're not preoccupied with your own guilt. And that's where legalism does so much damage by making everyone feel guilty all the time. But obviously, the progressive overreaction of no condemnation for anything is also wrong. So um, you can see here that in verse 6 that being a recent convert and becoming conceited, arrogant, puffed up comes before the fall. You fall under the same condemnation as the devil, it says here, or the devil will condemn you, or the devil will ensnare you. All of this fits together into this image of a guy who's very disciplined, has dignity, controlled, very moderate, you know, um, moderate in all things and able to resist temptations of all kinds. And it's just basically this picture of somebody who you can rely on. And then um, falling into the snare of the devil, it doesn't say outright that this is a loss of salvation. It would be pretty extreme if this actually means, you fall under the same condemnation as the devil and you um, fall into his snare. This translation is interesting because if it's the same condemnation as the devil, then you're thinking of a assembly leader who becomes puffed up and arrogant, but then because he doesn't understand things properly and he's too proud of his glory and his attention and everything, um, he ends up being proud, which is the condemnation of the devil, or same condemnation as the devil, which is actually an interesting statement on just the devil. And I guess being disgraced is also the snare of the devil. So, all in all, that's just an interesting little commentary when we're talking about overseers, but then it bleeds into this sort of comparison to the devil, somebody who's very powerful and arrogant and becomes disgraced is like the devil. And we think of the devil as being this maniacal, like psychotic, dangerous, predatory animal. But if you think of the devil instead as a legalistic, arrogant, blaspheming person who thinks they know better than everyone and wants to condemn everyone and cause them to fall into the snare and puff themselves up as being the authority, That's what I think of when I think of the devil. I don't think of, I mean, you have verses talking about him as a roaring lion and, a wolf and these different things that are more predatory, and the serpent obviously being subtle. But I think of the devil as being a lawyer who is looking for a way to prosecute you and make himself seem like he's the authority, even though he doesn't have the right to condemn you if you're in Christ. And so here, I believe that this is leaning more towards that, because it's about being conceited, and it's about um, being a recent convert and then suddenly getting puffed up, and like you're not ready for that. You're not grounded and humble in what you do. Now, let's go to the next section here. It says deacons. The word deacons is translated pretty much everywhere as deacons. It's interesting that that one is pretty much consistent. Some say helpers and some say ministers, but almost all of them say deacons. I'm curious what the Greek word is there. Verse 8. Diakonos. Oh, well, that's just a pretty much a direct translation of even how it sounds. Deacon. Okay. I mean, you can't argue with that then. Deacons likewise must be dignified, not double-tongued, meaning uh, you don't try to mince words and just tell people what they want to hear all the time. You're consistent. You're not double-tongued or given too much wine or greedy for money. So there you go again. They must hold to the mystery of the faith with a clear conscience. Mystery of the faith with a clear conscience. What do other translations say there? King James, holding the mystery of faith in a pure conscience. NET, holding to the mystery of the faith with a clear conscience. I'm wondering if that is the word enigma in Greek or if that's different. Mysterion. Okay. Mysterion. A secret. So you have the secret of the faith, the mystery of the faith, with a clear conscience. Now, that's a term you don't hear very often. But if it's the mystery of the faith, you would have to assume that that means the mystery of not being under the law, um, the idea that anyone can be saved, that, all these things that were so revolutionary and radical about Jesus' teachings taken together as something that has never been seen before. I mean, we're 2,000 years later, and it's still hard to get people to actually comprehend what we're talking about. And we still have all these heresies and people falling into traps and assuming that you still need the law and you still need that's 2,000 years of reflection and writing and scholarship and excellent commentaries on these things. So it's still a mystery, if we're honest about it. People still don't get it. And you talk to a non-Christian and they'll just have this absolutely bizarre understanding of what the gospel is and what Christianity is. And they're supposed to have a clear conscience. Additionally, they must first be tested. Then, if they are above reproach, let them serve as deacons. So I suppose, I don't know what kind of test they're talking about, but we could be talking about actually tempting them with some basic, you know, tests and be like, hey, here's a bunch of wine and here's, I don't think you would tempt somebody with lust, but money and wine are the two things they list here. So it's like, here's a bunch of money and some wine. If you do this and that, if they jump at it and they seem too eager for it, maybe they failed the test. Then if they are above reproach, let them serve as deacons. So then that's just for the helpers, basically. You're not actually an overseer. Um, it doesn't say anything about wives, right? It goes on to say in verse 11 of chapter 3 of First Timothy, in the same way, the women must be dignified, not slanderers. So slandering is a huge thing among women, always has been, but temperate and faithful in all things. That's pretty simple. But we're not talking about, uh, some translations here just have wives instead of women. Um, so I'm pretty sure this is talking about the wives of the deacons, or maybe the wives of overseers and deacons. But they're not being actually put in that position. And it's going to be very clear when Paul talks about women, like he did in the last chapter. Um, I'm just going back to chapter 2 here, and just to remind you guys, he says, um, I do not permit a woman to teach or to exercise authority over a man. She is to remain quiet. For Adam was formed first, then Eve. And it was not Adam who was deceived, but the woman who was deceived and fell into transgression. So, very clearly, we're not talking about women being deacons or overseers. This is directly following up. The chapter break is arbitrary. This is directly continuing from the discussion of uh, women and how women and men are supposed to be submissive in different ways. It's shifting to the overseer position, but you can't get that confused here. Women are supposed to be dignified, not slanderers, temperate and faithful in all things, but they're not being considered for the role of um, deacons or overseers. It says a deacon must be the okay, so here it does say a deacon must be the husband of but one wife, a good manager of his children and of his household. Okay, so there you go. I was kind of wondering. I seem to remember that they were being told to have, a good family as well. For those who have served well as deacons acquire for themselves a high standing and great confidence in the faith that is in Christ Jesus. Now, I don't know. I'm pretty sure that what I said was true, that all throughout history, it was easy to get a wife until this last generation where feminism and the destruction of the male authority and the male identity, the identity crisis of men, the weakness of men, and the corruption of women at the same time has led to this crisis of relationships and divorces and all that kind of stuff. Not that marriages were pleasant and easy in history. I mean, you can go back hundreds of years and read about common things that sound like they were written today about how marriages work. But anyway, this being a standard is just an interesting standard because I would think, especially as a single guy, I would think this has nothing to do with anything. You know, it's about the doctrine, it's about the teachings, it's about how you conduct yourself, maybe how you work, your reputation, just as a person in society. But this emphasis on how you treat your wife, it's kind of, I take it like it's assumed that you would have a wife. Every guy had a wife, unless you were completely incapable of, you know, basically you're an invalid or something like that. But um, women were always being matched up with men, and men were always being matched up by women at a young age. And by the time you're a full grown adult, you would be expected to have a wife, essentially match made for you or set up for you by your families. And then how you handle that wife, it doesn't say what the problems are that these men would otherwise have. But basically, it's saying that they need to have discipline, isn't it? I mean, I think it's saying a good manager of his children and of his household. He's supposed to be managing that. It's supposed to be you have to control your wife and you have to control your children, which is considered a negative thing today. But that's the basic standard. You have to be controlling and you have to obviously do it in a way that you're not provoking counter reactions and drama and all these problems that come with being too authoritarian and too strict. But the standard is you have to have authority and rule your household, not just be a bystander when your wife is ruling it or your kids are running amok and you don't actually have control. Obviously, this ties in with uh, the identity of Jesus as the husband of the church, the one that is managing us and is faithful and self sacrificing and noble and dignified and merciful, but is still managing it and still controlling it. Now, the mystery of godliness is the next final part of this chapter. Verse 14 says, "Although I hope to come to you soon, I am writing you these things in case I am delayed, so that you will know how each one must conduct himself in God's household, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and foundation of the truth. By common confession, the mystery of godliness is great. He appeared in the flesh, was vindicated by the Spirit, was seen by angels, was proclaimed among the nations, meaning the non Jews, was believed in throughout the world." Now, many different people from different cultures saw Jesus's persecution, heard about him. After he resurrected, he showed himself to many people as well. That wasn't just a private event. He showed himself to many people and was taken up in glory. That's the mystery of godliness, apparently. So, and he says the mystery of godliness is great. And obviously, since we have thousands of years of people worshiping Jesus, that's very true. It's still the most amazing story ever told. Now, this part about saying, this is the last part I'm really going to focus on here, I think, um, is that it says how each one must conduct himself in God's household, which is the church of the living God, the pillar of foundation of the truth. If you go to the interlinear, I believe you'll see the word household is oiko, which is a dwelling or by implication a family. So a household is a pretty good word for it. It's not the house of God, the temple. If it was a temple, they would just say temple. Household is a family dwelling place. So we're talking metaphorically, I think, that the household of God is now everybody who worships the Christ. Whereas before it would have been just Jews. Now the Gentiles are welcomed in if they believe. It's just whoever has the Holy Spirit, whoever's willing to listen. And so the household grows in size as the nations, as he goes on to talk about, the nations, the non Jews, the Gentile nations get to partake in this mystery, which at the time would have been a huge controversial thing, obviously, because Paul himself was persecuting people who were believing in Jesus because he was so legalistic and didn't think that it was possible and had to see it for himself that the Gentiles were being saved and all that. The household is not a building or a literal building or temple. And this term, the church of God, to conduct yourself, which is the church of God, that's where I think even this translation and basically every translation who uses the word church, I would strongly prefer if they would use the word assembly or gathering or even a meeting or calling out. All of those would be better than church because the word church is so loaded with this image of the building and the Catholic established idea of what a church is. But the term here is the same term you see all throughout the New Testament. It's ecclesia. It is a calling out. I'm reading the definition here. A calling out, i.e., a popular meeting, especially a religious congregation. That's all that it is. Nothing more. Nothing magical about it. Not a building, not a brand name, not a tax recognized establishment. Just you call people. Now we would use phones or social media or whatever. We'd say, "Hey, we're all getting together. Let's get together and talk." And then you'd have an overseer over it, and you would have deacons to help that would be being given orders, obviously, by the overseer. Um, and you just call people out for a thing. So you have a household and an assembly or a meeting, but none of that is institutional. You might go to the same household on a regular basis if there's a safe place where they can get together, or it might be in a town square or somewhere else. I don't know. Depends on the town, I suppose. But um, that's the last thing I would mention there is just that, you know, let's go back to the actual verse here. How each one must conduct himself in God's household, which is the assembly or the gathering of the living God, the pillar and foundation of the truth. So I believe it's saying is that um, God's household is the pillar and foundation of the truth, based on how it's phrased here. I'm just going to double check that with the NET. In case I'm delayed, to let you know how people ought to conduct themselves in the household of God, because it is the church of the living God, the support and bulwark of the truth. Yeah, I think it's saying that the household is the pillar and foundation of the truth, meaning, again, this is why you don't want it to be a temple or a building or an institution, because it's the gathering. It is actually more than the gathering. The household is everyone who will ever be in that body rightfully, because they listen to this advice. They have the faith. They conduct themselves well. And when they conduct themselves well, they are establishing the pillar. They are establishing the foundation. They are creating the household and drawing people into it and growing it. Um, so I just want to get away from the institutional thing again here, because now this whole chapter has been about how to govern and oversee things. And I think you could read this very easily. And I think that the way you should read this is that it's about a completely non-institutional city by city gathering where you could have people traveling between them. Nobody belongs to any particular church or denomination. And there's a mystery of faith in it. They're figuring it out still, but they're trying to set a good example. And you have overseers. Now, we don't even know how many overseers there would be. Um, but clearly you would have to have at least one. So maybe you could have multiple overseers in a city. I don't know. I don't think this mentioned anything about that. But an overseer would be somebody who would have some authority. People would be expected to listen to them, and we're not getting into an institution here, which means the Catholic Church was completely wrong for setting it up the way they did, especially with the Bishop of Rome. They say again, they use the word bishop instead of overseer. And then they say the Bishop of Rome, and Rome is supposed to be the center of the whole church. And so he's the bishop of bishops, he's the leader of leaders, the overseer of overseers, and he's given all this authority and all this, and he's ruling over it like an empire, and it's all tied into the politics and all this stuff. And then the churches come up and everybody has to attend it. It's mandatory, and everyone has to be a Christian. And it's just this nightmare, the satanic blasphemy, the beast system. This is a picture of a very simple, organic, logical system that would pretty much naturally occur anyway, even without you trying to force it. People get together, before mass communication, of course, especially. You get together, you talk about things, you share what you know, you learn about this mystery that you're partaking in. It's not meant to be a complete mystery forever, but it is mysterious what's happening, especially when the Holy Spirit's doing amazing things among you and people are being healed and prophecies are happening, and you're being persecuted, but yet the faith is growing and nobody's, running away, and lots of crazy things are happening at this time. And meanwhile, you're supposed to have men who control their wives and control their families being in charge of those gatherings. I love it. I love the simplicity of it. Next, how many chapters are there? There's 6 chapters. So this is chapter 3. Tomorrow, probably not, but in the near future, I want to do some more Bible studies on this. Hopefully, my setup is better today. Um, I'll just give you a quick story about it, in case you're interested. TikTok has a studio program you can download on your computer, which is pretty much exactly the same as OBS. It detects your camera, it detects your microphone, you hit go live, it automatically streams that to TikTok, which I thought would be really cool. But my OBS stopped working as soon as I installed that program, and I guess it can't decide which one it was trying to do. I was trying to do both at once on the same computer. Apparently, that's not allowed. Hopefully I can get OBS to start working, because I'm happy to stream from my phone to TikTok and from OBS to YouTube at the same time. Today, this is just a YouTube only stream. There wasn't any comments really. That's fine. This is how I was going to do a Bible study anyway. In the future, if we have more chat, if I have TikTok going and people are talking there, I will open it up to more discussion. But thank you guys for watching. Leave comments if you want. Here's a comment that just came in. Lovely Soul says, I appreciate your Bible study. So thank you. I appreciate you listening. Yeah, I plan on doing this more regularly. And I think mornings, I don't know how many people are going to be available at this hour. I know it's early, but this is a good time for me. And I'm starting to realize I should be doing more in the mornings. And so I appreciate that. Feel free to leave comments if you're watching this on the replay, and about the chapter itself, 1 Timothy 3, overseers, controlling women, the mystery of godliness, all of these things. These are interesting topics. So Corv says, just listening, I work second shift. I work a night shift, so I'm right there with you. I'm about to go to sleep, and it's in the morning. But that's how it works. And that's how it's always worked for me for a long time. So, anyway, hopefully we can make this more of a habit. Um, I got, I think, pretty interesting plans for this next coming up couple weeks. Um, I'm thinking of doing a Discord instead of the Telegram, or I shouldn't say instead of, but primarily focusing on a Discord that will heavily encourage actual chatting and being a more of a community, not just a broadcast from me to you. I think I'm ready for that, ready to sort of do the community building Discord. Um, that also has voice chat. Although with these morning things, if we get more of a chat going here, I don't think anyone's going to be lacking for access to me and chatting and having a little bit of a community discussion. But we'll see how it goes. And I've got a couple of things going on. I want to reboot the podcast and have it more of a co-host, sidekick kind of thing, a structure, make that more of a routine. I want to basically, I want to open myself up to be more of a routine, accessible, community building, live type of content creator. In addition to writing my new book and, the other stuff that I'm doing and doing uploaded TikTok videos and all that kind of stuff as well in between. But um, I like doing live stuff and I like having people leaving comments. And even if you're just listening, that's totally fine. But uh, I miss having the ongoing discussion from the community as I'm talking about it. You can jump in and ask something. And so hopefully we're going to get more of that. So I'm excited. Thank you guys. God bless you. Thank you for reading along if you were reading your Bibles. Um, I really do mean it. If you have any questions or comments about this chapter, I want to follow up on it in the next video. Um, and then we can just keep going and keep studying First Timothy, which is a very interesting and underrated book, in my opinion, with a lot of key phrases. I don't know if this is when Paul was very old when he wrote this, but um, some of the things he says, like first and second chapters, both had these ridiculous twists where he's talking about handing people over to Satan to punish them, to teach them to not blaspheme, and how women are going to be saved through childbearing. I still don't know what that means. Um, this one didn't have a particular big mystery in it, but this whole discussion of the overseer in the congregation, you can see how different it ends up when you take a more strict reading than just assuming that the tradition of the Catholic sort of system was correct, and you break away from that and you rethink it from square one based on the language and stuff. So that's always an important thing for me to try to do. Um, Corv now asks, did you see my comment on the childbearing one? No, I did not, apparently. Let me quickly check on that because this would be a great time to follow up on a comment. So chapter 2, I assume. Let's go down to the comments. Okay, yeah, I see it here. Wow, this is a big comment. All right, we'll do this. Thank you for the comment, by the way. I'll read this here. When Paul said she will be saved, I think he means saved from herself, not a salvific principle, as he is very aware of how the independent mindset can truly affect a woman. Um, no, your comment is here, Corv. I see it. I'm reading it now. Their mind is clouded with pride, which God resists. So therefore, with the effect the child gives the mother, in turn, it is for her sake that she had that child and be humbled about life, lest she would never change. Sorry. So basically, because she can't think of herself as being independent and therefore fall into the sort of whole trap of the rebellious woman that doesn't submit to her husband and needs to take care of the child, that creates the mindset of responsibility, um, sympathy, caring for the child, being selfless, providing, and ending up being a better example, I suppose. Now, you've got plenty more here. Nowadays, the effect is being diminished because I still see a lot of women who have many kids and are still the same. They have subconscious anger towards the child because it reminds them of the baby's father, who is more than likely isn't present. It's also true that most women do become humbled and change their mindset even at a young age, since there are a lot of teen pregnancies. I've seen that too. I can see how a dilemma can easily be formed if we are going to be realistic and include all factors. We have to realize that due to the feministic movement, a daughter doesn't have the same connection with her father. Very true. So now she is forced to join the workforce and provide for herself, even her kid. This lifestyle can be another reason why their mindset didn't change after having children. Right. And then you add in the state paying you for having kids, welfare kind of stuff, child allowance, as we call it in Canada. I don't know what it's called in America. Um, the more you get paid to be irresponsible, but you're being, your other option is to work and support yourself and not have the strong man supporting you and guiding you and protecting you. And a community, people used to live with their, you know, in sort of this community, extended family communities of cousins and aunts and uncles and grandmothers and grandfathers and great grandfathers, all taking care of each other at the same time. And you wouldn't live hundreds of miles apart from each other. So you would never be far from people who were happy to take care of your kid for a bit and help each other out. The whole situation is so different now. So I like what you're saying so far. Let's see where it goes from here. They love their children, and that's why they adopt this working lifestyle. But they also lash out on their children, overwhelming sometimes because the father isn't there to do it. Very true. So in a sense, she has to be both mother and father, and this conflation or two differing roles can keep her in the original mindset. Yes, yeah, it's very unfair to the child to have a mom who's trying to fulfill the father role, and um, that's what I was wondering last time. Is it talking about salvation, or is it just talking about the woman's personality being transformed through the pregnancy? Because even just a woman who's pregnant hasn't even had the kid yet. Just a day and night difference in their personalities from what I've seen personally. Um, they become much more uh, sensitive, but in not in a. I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean that in like um, receptive to things and gentle, I guess. I've seen that. Um, oh, here's a comment from Lovely Soul. The concept behind childbearing is spot on. As a mother, I realized what was actually what we call purpose. Wow, I uh, I like that. So let's see here. Last paragraph here. Um, I give huge props to those women who are able to do that. The main reason is for the love of their child. So in a sense, you can say even if she keeps the original mindset, that effect of having a child, though it may be minuscule, still affects her to be there for the child and her give her a new purpose. Yeah, I think that's a great analysis. Um, you know, and I think to go as far as to say she'll be saved through childbearing based on all of that, the principle of what happens when a woman gets pregnant and has a child, I would not. go as far as to say that's saved through childbearing, except that I have actually just seen basically a complete transformation of a woman's personality when she becomes a mom. And, the sort of the unconditional love that a child gives a mom uh, sort of cures a lot of the anxiety of uh, a feeling of worthlessness and of the need to sort of overcompensate or worry and stuff. If your child loves you, or children, I mean, most women had many children um, in the past, and you sort of become this hero to all your kids, right? So you don't have that insecurity that you used to have. And then if the father is there, especially, that you know is a sort of protective covering and should be there to support that as well, and guide and be a resource to go to if you need something. And so a lot of this is not talking about a spiritual salvation that we tend to think of as being, if you believe in Jesus, you're saved. That's what matters. For the woman, it's like he's saying this is such a profound transformation from the inside out, and from like all around you, that it's like being saved, I guess. And he compares it, of course, to this whole. Let's go back a chapter and look at that quickly. Um, yeah, submissiveness, not trying to be authority over a man, um, remembering Adam and Eve, and then and then saying women will be saved through childbearing if they continue in faith, love, and holiness with self-control. So that speaks to what Corv was saying: faith, love, and holiness with self-control, not lashing out, managing to keep it together. Um, so yeah, I think that's a good insight. Let's see what these other comments are, because apparently I missed a couple of these comments. I checked back, but I guess I didn't check back often enough. Um, David says, "You like First Timothy. I'm reading Fire in the Rabbit Hole, and you point to it again, discussing flat Earth. I'm excited to eventually get there in my reading the Bible." Okay. Let's see. Somebody else says, "So Eve had her pains in childbirth increase, yet Christ still came through a woman and saved us all who receive. So childbirth pains is just something that's saved by faith and damned by rejection of Christ all go through." Yeah. Yeah, you can't read too much into the childbirth pain increase. I don't think it's not that deep of a thing for the childbearing pain to be increased. It's a punishment for women because of Eve, but it's not so metaphorical that it, you know, rules out the Savior even being holy because he was born from a woman, or anything that extreme. Lovely Soul says, "It's no longer about you. You see that time is the most expensive and underestimated form of love." Interesting. "I appreciate deeply, love purely, and am eternally grateful for the gift I didn't deserve or earn, only after experiencing childbirth." That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, the sacrifices that you have to make as a mom, um, you know, I can see it. Um, your whole mindset would have to change, and therefore, you would have a greater appreciation of what God is doing for you, and what your husband would be doing for you if he's a good provider. Um, so I appreciate your insight there. We got a couple more comments here, actually. Um, wow, yeah, I'm very glad that you brought that up. Actually, the comment, because now we can actually come back in this one and follow up on it, which is exactly what I wanted to do. I can't pronounce this name. It starts with a Z, but it says, on the part of being a mother, I wasn't a complete person until I became one. I learned so much of God's love by being a parent. I never doubted God, but his love was so much more defined when I became a parent. So much more defined. That's an interesting way of putting it. I always said after I had my kids, I would never be the same person I am today if it weren't for them. They brought me closer to God and the true person I'm supposed to be. I definitely think there is a spiritual aspect to it. Of course, though, you have to give yourself over to God if this is going to be the case. Many mothers out there come to the same conclusion as me. So yeah, that reinforces this whole thing. And that's what I love about doing this study. And I would say this too. This is an interesting point is when you read what Jesus said, he talks about the importance of how you treat the poor, how you treat the needy. He, of course, was a perfect example of curing people and providing and being generous. And the the fact that you're supposed to the way you treat other people is inseparable from the gospel and what happened to you in your beliefs. It's not enough to be intellectually saved. You have to actually transform the way you interact with people. The biggest thing that a mom can do is raise her kids and give them the love and sacrifice for them and be transformed. And so, if it's true that a man would have to transform and start to treat other people in society differently, people who would be on the margins, who would generally be overlooked, and um, he has to contain his temper and he has to try to govern himself and treat everyone around him differently, and that's part of his salvation process. Not that it's a process in the Catholic sense of sacraments and whatever. I'm not trying to say that, but as his maturity as a Christian and evidence of his faith, then I guess it would make perfect sense that a woman, the biggest thing she could do is to do that for her kids. And so, in both cases, the transformation of how you treat people, how it reflects back on you, and that feedback cycle of giving love and receiving love and showing love and embodying that love, that's exactly what Jesus was always trying to get. And it starts with the family, it starts with yourself. But obviously, traditionally and still today, a father is not the one handling the kids all the time. So, um, Korf says the word is evident in real life. And Lenny says God's love becomes more apparent when you become a parent. Well said. It becomes more apparent when you become a parent. Yeah, and I'm a big fan of the idea of um, the metaphor of God our Father. I think you can solve most problems of our relationship with God by just remembering that simple metaphor of our Father. Obviously, there's no mother in the Godhood, but um, we are compared to the bride, and there's all that kind of metaphor there. And uh, Jesus, for what it's worth, did say that his followers and his disciples were his mother at one point. And that's not lost on me either, because he was saying, that's not my mom. Mary is not my mom. Uh, my disciples, that's my mom. I was born from, them. Uh, and I think that has all sorts of implications. But yeah, to the whole parent child connection, for Paul to go and tie it in with um, that the woman will be saved by childbearing. I never know with Paul if he's trying to go extra level yet and say there's actually a mystery here of metaphysical, spiritual, magical sort of. I'm not going to, magic is obviously just to get the point across that kind of transformation, or is it a rational explanation you could see that has a spiritual component um, just because of your identity and the way you think and the way you act. So thank you guys all for your comments and your feedback. Let's see here. One more comment. Um, One more comment. Terry, can you speak of on AI in the book of Joshua? I was mind blown to see how it seems like a description of AI as we know it. The Wikipedia write up on it is interesting too. Have no idea what the book of Joshua says about anything that would be considered AI, but that would be a topic for another day. And that's going to be the end of this stream. Thank you guys for your comments. See, this is why I love comments. It just instantly becomes 100 times better. I was glad to do the study just by myself too, but as soon as you get comments, it all comes to life more. So that'll be it for this morning. Um, I plan on being on more mornings. I plan on doing a separate live TikTok live stream with my camera, and then you can get the feedback from TikTok comments and the YouTube chat simultaneously. So I don't know. I think this is going to end up being a quite a productive thing. And just going through books of the Bible, it's amazing how much you can pick up when you read it closely and you care about the translations. So see you guys around.